Well, welcome back. We are in part two on looking at secular humanism and the challenges it brings from a Christian worldview perspective. Last time we kind of introduced it and then looked at some of the early history from the first century and before, some of the Greek philosophers, and then into the time of the development of Christianity, the apostles, and particularly Paul and the uses of some words and his interaction with Epicureans and Stoics, realizing that the early Christians were involved with the world around them and were aware of the different beliefs in a very pluralistic world. So now we're going to move forward and talk a little bit more about that development and see that as the church grew and went into the future time periods, that that interaction between what was going on in the world around them, they were involved in it very much. And in fact, as Christianity grew and became the dominant belief system, it was going to have a profound influence on how people thought about different things, and influence even up into the Enlightenment with humanism and on into secularism and things like that. So we'll be moving that direction in this second video, but we're only going to cover a small portion of that in this one. So let me share the screen with you and we can get started. All right, well, now that we looked at the apostolic period, and now we post-apostolic period, or what is called the patristic period, you have Christians are primarily being persecuted. Now, those persecutions weren't constant, but off and on there was persecution. But at the same time as all that was going on, Christianity would start developing its own schools, and so Christian leaders developed various schools, and by which they continued their studies. As scripture was also, by this time, most of the scripture had been brought together. It hadn't been officially made a canon yet, but it was getting there. But these early Christian leaders would start these schools. Now, like the Bishop of Smyrna, Polycarp, in 155 was burned at the stake, and persecution was going on during the time, but Christianity kept growing. And you have Alexandria had one of the schools in Egypt. It was founded by Pantaenus of Alexandria. The two most famous from that school were Clement and Origen. Now, remember, these were schools where leaders were continuing their learning, but also training new leaders. And these were actually schools of missionaries, and they were training people to go out and interact with the world, which meant they had to know the philosophies and the religions all around them, which were quite a few. But you will see in the writings, besides writing to other Christians on matters of the church, they would also oftentimes write apologetic things explaining Christianity to the non-Christians and things like that. So also in Carthage in North Africa, Tertullian started there and so you can see that one came around the same time period. And then you have the Antioch, that's Antioch of Syria, one of the earliest churches, but we see that city mentioned in the New Testament as a center for early Christians, especially Gentile Christians. Ignatius of Antioch was involved with that, who was martyred under Trajan. And then you had Tatian and Justin Martyr. And so these were some of the leaders from that school. And then in Rome, Papias, we don't have any of his writings, but he is quoted by the later Eusebius here, who wrote the first Christian church history. And in between, you got Irenaeus, who was a very famous theologian. And so a lot of writing from scholarly Christian leaders during this time period. So this would be post-apostolic to the Christendom time period, where Christianity is legalized in 312 with the Edict of Milan by Constantine. And after that, the church is legal, so things will start changing somewhat, because now they don't have to be worrying about persecution. The patristic period actually covers from the 2nd century to the 8th century, depending on how some people date it a little bit differently. But it's generally the span from the end of the 1st century, when the New Testament almost completed, what we often call the Apostolic Age, to one of the two councils, either the Council of Chalcedon in 451 or the Council of Nicaea in AD 787, the later one. And then the patristic comes from pater, meaning father in Latin and Greek. So that's the study of the early Christian writers who were designated the church fathers. The church fathers are generally divided into early scholars known as the ante-Nicene fathers, who had lived and wrote before the Council of Nicaea of 325. Now remember, the other one was the later, I think they call that the Second Council of Nicaea. And the later Nicene or post-Nicene fathers who lived and wrote after 325. Also, they sometimes call them the Greek fathers and the Latins, because generally the earlier ones wrote Greek and others wrote in Latin. The next period is going to be the Scholastic period, but there were some precursors as in the patristic period. Scholars like St. Ambrose, St. Augustine are often kind of put in the category of scholastic to some degree. Augustine was a convert of Ambrose, but they were among the first Christians, fathers, who brought Christian ideas and Greek philosophy together. Now, that's not to say that the earlier ones did or didn't. There was somewhat of disagreement among the church fathers, like Tertullian, Irenaeus, and some of the others. Some were willing to say you could express Christian thought and ideas through philosophical categories, where others were not so sure you should do that, and actually would not do it. But by the time of Ambrose and Augustine, it was quite normal to use Greek philosophy in explaining Christian thinking. So that was a move that would continue on into the Scholastic period. All right. Scholastic period, this is a philosophical system and speculative tendencies of various medieval thinkers who were working against the backdrop of the Christian religious teachings, or dogma, we sometimes say. They sought to solve new general philosophical problems as dealing with faith and reason, will, and the intellect. Talking about realism, nominalism, provability of the existence of God, various aspects like that. And the patristic period was, you could say the patristic period was more dominated by sticking with the Christian teachings and let philosophy kind of influence it some. But in the Scholastic period, they were willing to allow more input from philosophy, and that would, show up in the writings of this time period more. And there was a strong emphasis on dialectic reasoning to extend knowledge by inference and to resolve contradictions. And so you have a lot of writers in this time period that are Christian, but they're also mixing a lot of thought from philosophical areas. Anselm of Canterbury, a Benedictine monk, is frequently referred to as the father of scholasticism, since he was one of the first to employ dialectics in philosophy or theology in a way that would later become a standard with scholastic scholars. So here's your guy that's the groundbreaker in this type of melding of philosophical thinking, particularly in a dialectic manner. Thomas Aquinas, a Dominican friar, was scholastic who used the philosophy of Aristotle in theological studies. Strangely enough, as important as he is today, he was not very important back when he was writing. But as time passed, his theological works, they're quite phenomenal and are read quite a bit today. But he did use a lot of Aristotelian thinking and reasoning in his theological studies and work and writings. And so these are two that really, the first one to get started, then the later one. But this kind of scholastic type of work will continue on into the Renaissance and Enlightenment. So as we move on from this period on into the Renaissance period, we will begin to see the beginning of humanistic thinking. And generally, at this period, even though humanism, the idea of humanism was coming into to its own as far as a way to understand humanity, and sometimes apart from Christianity. But in the beginning, people were humanists in the sense that they all believed that humanity was unique as people created in God's image. And so God values humanity, and his relationship with humanity, he views everybody of equal value in humanity, and that humans are reasoning beings, and that's unique compared to the animals of the world. And so that uniqueness of humanity is emphasized by Christianity. So today we think of humanism, a lot of times people think of humanism as in opposition to humanity. And it can be defined in a way that it is in opposition of the biblical worldview. But it can also be understood within the Christian system as well. And so there is such thing as Christian humanists, and we'll explain that more as we go along. And we'll talk about this fellow here, Francisco Petrarch, here in the next slide. Well, one after it, I guess. But one of the things we need to keep in mind as we get into this time period, which is moving from the Scholastic period into the Renaissance period, that revealed truth and reason. Now, when we say that they dealt with philosophy, that's the area of reason as well. But dealing with revealed truth has to use reason as well. But out of this, or a revealed truth, and then from that reasoning and realizing, what God has done and the uniqueness of humanity, you've got a lot of things that come out of the thinking of this time period. Revealed truth and reason bring us the scientific method. It comes out of a Christian biblical worldview. Free societies, universal human rights, humanism itself is a product of Christian thinking about the value of humanity. Boy, I'm going bad on this. The abolition of slavery, and then religious tolerance as well. And even though a lot of these are talked about as if they didn't have a Christian beginning, they did. And the Christian ideals and Christian teachings pushed for this kind of thing, and it would move on through into the Renaissance and Enlightenment, but eventually it would tilt towards reason to the exclusion of God and biblical teaching. And we'll talk about how all that takes place as we go along here. Francisco Petrarch, he was a 14th century poet, and a literary guy. He gets designated the founder of humanism and the father of the Renaissance, which is, he's got two big names for that. And and he was a religious guy, and he went back and was discovering the Roman philosophers like the statesman Cicero, and he got those manuscripts and he would translate them. Of course, he was Italian, so he was translating them into Italian. But he's the one that kind of started this movement to resurrect these ancient writings from the ancient philosophers, and so he was doing that. And this would give rise to the Renaissance and then humanism as well. He didn't divorce what he was doing as he was looking at the humanistic side of things. He argued that God had given humans a very vast intellectual ability and creative potential, and believed that we should use it to the fullest. And so this inspired what would become known as the humanist philosophy, which led to the Renaissance in all of this. And but he didn't want to separate Christian thinking from classical culture, and so he advocated a continuity between the two. And as you'll see, as you get in further into Enlightenment period, there was more of a push by some to divorce reason from the Christian message, and we'll get into how some of that takes place. But this going into the Renaissance, this translation of all this literature and taking this literature and using it to understand the world better would have an influence on Enlightenment leaders. So humanism, if you just take humanism in general, can be positively be referred to as the dignity of human beings and improving the human condition. And for Christians in the biblical worldview, that's what we're told to do. I mean, by definition, Christian people created in the image of God have dignity in God's sight, and thus should have dignity in the sight of his followers. And Jesus gave the example of improving people's human conditions while he was on earth. He not only taught, but he also healed people and ministered to people, and he told his followers to do the same. But on the more negative side, it can and is often today associated with the belief system in which human beings replace God as a central source of knowledge and ethical decisions through reason only. In other words, they replaced God giving us ethical instruction and guidance with saying we can do all we need to do just on our own reason alone. And so this is going to introduce us into humanism. and which is what we're going to cover in the next video. And we'll get deeper into what is meant by humanism and the different types of humanism, and we'll be looking at those things. Let me get out of the sharing here. So we'll pick up on that in the third video and get deeper into that, what we're going to be talking about humanism, and eventually we'll get to how it influenced secular humanism. So I bid you have a good day.